Imagine this: a woman vanishes without a trace. Her husband appears distraught, pleading with police for answers. Weeks turn into months, months into years, and the case grows cold. But then, 10 years later, detectives searching the same house make a discovery so horrifying, it shocks even the most seasoned investigators. This is not a movie. This is a real case, and it begins in the quiet suburbs of Michigan. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives for more chilling true crime stories that uncover the darkest secrets hidden in plain sight. On a chilly autumn evening in 2008, police in Kalamazoo County, Michigan, received a frantic 911 call. The caller, David Miller, reported that his wife, Rachel Miller, had gone missing. He said she went out for a late-night walk after an argument and never returned. When officers arrived at the Miller residence, they found David pacing on the porch, wringing his hands. His story was simple. Rachel had been stressed, restless, and in need of fresh air. She often took short walks around the neighborhood to cool off, but this time, she didn't come back. David painted Rachel as a devoted wife and mother of two. She worked part-time at a local library, sang in the church choir, and rarely stayed out late. For her to vanish so suddenly was completely out of character. Police quickly organized a search. Volunteers, neighbors, and local deputies combed through nearby woods and fields. Flyers with Rachel's smiling face, brown hair neatly tucked behind her ears, soft green eyes, and a warm, approachable smile were plastered on lampposts and convenience store windows. The community was shaken. Rachel's disappearance seemed unthinkable. How could a woman just vanish in such a safe, close-knit neighborhood? But as the hours stretched into days and no trace of Rachel was found, suspicions began to simmer quietly beneath the surface. From the very beginning, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something about David Miller's story didn't add up. Rachel was last seen at 9:30 p.m., according to David. He claimed she left wearing a light sweater, jeans, and sneakers, clothes that didn't make sense for the near-freezing October night. When asked if she had her phone, wallet, or house keys, David hesitated before answering. Eventually, he admitted she left without them. Detective Laura Henderson, the lead investigator, noted in her report, "It is highly unusual for an adult female to voluntarily leave her home at night without personal belongings, especially during cold weather conditions." Still, procedure dictated that police start with a wide net. They check local hospitals, shelters, and surrounding towns. No one matching Rachel's description had been admitted, arrested, or seen. Meanwhile, David threw himself into the public eye. He gave interviews to local TV stations, tearfully pleading for his wife's safe return. He spoke about how Rachel was his whole world and how their children, ages 7 and 10, cried themselves to sleep each night without their mother. On the surface, he looked like a heartbroken husband, but to those who knew the couple personally, the cracks began to show. Neighbors whispered about heated arguments they had overheard through open windows. A family friend recalled Rachel confiding that she sometimes felt trapped in her marriage. Another church member mentioned Rachel had quietly asked about divorce lawyers months before she vanished. Detectives began looking harder at David. His timeline was shaky, and when they examined his phone records, they found a 2-hour gap on the night Rachel disappeared. David explained it away as him going for a drive to clear his head after their argument. Then came the polygraph test. David agreed to take one voluntarily. The results were inconclusive, but examiners noted his elevated stress levels when asked direct questions like, "Did you cause Rachel's disappearance? Do you know where Rachel is right now?" Investigators brought cadaver dogs to the Miller property. The dogs alerted near the backyard shed, but a thorough search revealed nothing but old tools and storage boxes. The case began to stall. Weeks turned into months. Rachel's face faded from the evening news. Leads dried up. The once bustling search parties dwindled to a handful of volunteers. And by the time a year had passed, the Miller children were being raised almost entirely by David, who moved them into a new routine and stopped granting media interviews. To the outside world, it appeared that Rachel Miller had become yet another missing person in a country with thousands of cold cases. But inside the police department, the file remained open, sitting heavy on Detective Henderson's desk. She couldn't prove it. Not yet, but she was convinced David knew far more than he ever admitted. By the second year of Rachel's disappearance, the Miller case had faded from local headlines. But in the neighborhood where the family lived, the story never really went away. People began noticing things, small things, unsettling things, that they couldn't quite ignore. Several neighbors reported hearing faint, muffled sounds coming from the Miller home late at night. At first, most brushed it off as the children, maybe nightmares or a TV left on too loud. But one neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Pratt, who lived directly behind the Millers, was adamant about what she heard. "I know the difference between kids crying and a woman's voice," she told police. "There were nights when I swear I heard a woman calling out, 'Weak, but there.'" Her claims were quietly noted, but without physical evidence, detectives had nothing concrete to act on. Another neighbor, a handyman by trade, found it unusual that David had suddenly boarded up the tiny basement windows of his house. He claimed David told him it was to save on heating bills, but the timing was odd. The boards went up just months after Rachel vanished. Detective Henderson made a note of it during a follow-up interview but found herself stonewalled when she asked David directly. He insisted it was purely practical. Old houses bleed heat like crazy in the winter. "I was just trying to save money." Still, the explanation didn't sit right. Perhaps the strangest clue of all came in the form of 2 letters that arrived at Rachel's sister's house in 2011. They were handwritten, postmarked from a nearby town, and signed in Rachel's name. The letters claimed she had left voluntarily, that she was starting over, and asked her family not to search for her. But Rachel's sister, Anna, didn't buy it for a second. The handwriting was shaky, inconsistent, and missing the little quirks Rachel had always had in her penmanship. Even stranger, the letters contained no return address, no phone number, no personal details, just vague reassurances. Experts who later examined the letters couldn't say definitively whether Rachel had written them. But to Anna and to Detective Henderson, they felt staged, like someone was trying to throw investigators off track. Then there were the Miller children. Teachers reported that the kids had grown withdrawn, especially the youngest, Emily. She drew pictures of her family during art class, but what unsettled teachers most was how Emily always drew her mother inside the house, sometimes in the basement. When a counselor gently asked Emily about it, she said, "Mommy's still here. Daddy just doesn't let her come upstairs." The counselor documented it, but psychologists explained it away as a child's way of coping with grief, clinging to the hope that her mother was alive. Still, when Detective Henderson read the report, her stomach tightened. Meanwhile, David's behavior grew stranger. Despite portraying himself as a grieving widower, he never officially declared Rachel dead. He didn't remarry, nor did he seem interested in moving on romantically. Instead, he kept to himself, working his construction job by day and locking the house tight at night. Delivery workers noticed he rarely let anyone inside, meeting them at the door instead. One utility worker, sent to check on a gas line issue, recalled David becoming visibly agitated when he asked to access the basement. Each oddity, taken alone, could be explained away, but together they painted a troubling picture. Detective Henderson pushed for a warrant, but her superiors hesitated. Without hard evidence, blood, fingerprints, or a credible witness, there was little legal ground to invade a man's home years after his wife's disappearance. And so, time marched on. But the whispers never stopped. To the neighbors, the Miller house became a place of quiet dread, a home where lights flickered at odd hours, where children never invited friends over, and where something felt very, very wrong. Little did they know, their instincts were right. Buried beneath that ordinary-looking suburban home was a secret so dark it would take another decade for the world to uncover it. For nearly 10 years, Rachel Miller's case sat on the shelf, filed away among thousands of unsolved missing persons reports. Every so often, a tip would trickle in, a possible sighting in another state, a rumor of her working under a new name, someone swearing they saw her at a bus terminal. Each lead fizzled out. But in 2018, everything changed. Detective Mark Alvarez, newly assigned to the Cold Case Division, came across Rachel's file while reviewing unsolved cases. He was younger than most of his colleagues, but relentless. Where others saw a dead end, Alvarez saw loose threads waiting to be pulled. He started by re-interviewing witnesses, neighbors, and Rachel's family. Many were surprised the case was being reopened after so long, and when Alvarez sat down with Rachel's sister, Anna, she told him something that reignited the entire investigation. "I don't care what the reports say. I know Rachel didn't just walk away. David knows where she is. He's been hiding something from the very beginning." Alvarez listened carefully. Unlike earlier investigators, he didn't dismiss the emotional weight behind Anna's words. He believed that families often noticed what police overlooked. By 2018, Rachel's children were young adults. Emily, now 19, was in college, and her older brother, Jacob, was working full-time. Alvarez requested interviews with them, interviews that had never been conducted since they were children when their mother disappeared. What Emily said chilled him. "I used to hear noises. When I was a kid, I thought I was dreaming, but they were real. I'd hear tapping on the floor at night. And sometimes when Dad wasn't home, I swore I heard someone calling my name from the basement." Jacob admitted that their father forbade them from going down there. "He told us it was dangerous, full of old wiring and asbestos. We weren't even allowed to touch the door. He had a special lock on it, one only he had the key to." Their statements weren't proof, but they were enough to warrant a closer look. Alvarez dug deeper and found something curious in the city's utility records. Over the years, the Miller home had unusually high water usage compared to similar houses in the area. Heating costs were also oddly elevated, especially during the summers. When he tracked down a former utility worker, the man recalled an incident from years back. "I was supposed to inspect the basement pipes, but David wouldn't let me in. He practically begged me to just check the outside lines and sign off. He looked nervous, like he was hiding something." That detail stuck with Alvarez. Armed with testimony from Rachel's children, the neighbor reports, and the strange utility patterns, Alvarez presented his findings to the district attorney. It wasn't an airtight case, but it was enough to argue probable cause. Detective Henderson, who had since retired but kept in touch with her old colleagues, heard about the renewed push and personally vouched for the search warrant. "I always knew we'd find something in that house," she told Alvarez. The warrant was granted. On a cold morning in November 2018, police cars lined the quiet suburban street once again. Neighbors peeked through curtains as officers surrounded the Miller property. David Miller, now 52, answered the door looking bewildered and defensive. "What's this about? Haven't you people done enough? My wife left me. She's gone." But this time, detectives weren't leaving without answers. They swept through the home methodically, cataloging every room. Upstairs, nothing seemed out of place. The children's old bedrooms were untouched time capsules, filled with toys and posters from another decade. The kitchen was spotless, the living room ordinary. Then they reached the basement door. It was locked, heavy, and reinforced from the outside with a steel padlock. David insisted he lost the key years ago. Officers cut through it. When the door creaked open, a foul, musty odor wafted upward, damp concrete mixed with something far worse. The air was thick, stale, as though it hadn't been circulated in years. They descended the steps slowly, flashlights cutting through the gloom. At first, the basement looked like standard storage. Boxes, tools, an old washing machine. But then, in the far corner, they spotted something unusual. A false wall, recently painted, slightly uneven compared to the rest of the foundation. Behind that wall, detectives would uncover the secret that had haunted the Miller family for a decade. The sound of hammers and crowbars echoed off the concrete walls as detectives tore into the false partition. Each strike revealed more of what David had tried so desperately to hide. The wall wasn't professionally built. It was crude, cobbled together with mismatched planks and drywall, then slathered in paint to make it blend. Whoever built it hadn't been concerned with aesthetics. Their only goal was concealment. When the last slab gave way, the beam of Alvarez's flashlight pierced a narrow pitch-black corridor beyond. The air that seeped out was stifling, thick with mildew, sweat, and something metallic. A hush fell over the team as they carefully stepped inside. The hidden space was small, no larger than a walk-in closet. Its walls were bare concrete, damp with moisture. A single mattress lay on the floor, thin and stained. Rusted chains bolted into the wall dangled loosely, their purpose impossible to deny. On a makeshift table sat empty food containers, plastic water bottles, and worn-out books with pages yellowed from humidity. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet. But what froze the detectives in place wasn't the objects. It was the figure curled on the mattress, shielding her eyes from the sudden beam of light. "Rachel?" Detective Alvarez whispered. The woman flinched at the sound, her body trembling. Her hair was long, matted, streaked with gray far beyond her years. Her skin was pale, almost translucent from lack of sunlight. Her frame was gaunt, bones pressing against thin skin. It was her, Rachel Miller. She was alive. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rachel lifted her head, eyes wide, voice hoarse from disuse. "Please, don't let him take me back." The words shattered the silence. Officers rushed forward, assuring her she was safe now. A blanket was wrapped around her frail shoulders as paramedics were called to the scene. Rachel clung desperately to Alvarez's sleeve. How long has it been?" she croaked. Alvarez hesitated, not wanting to traumatize her further. "You've been gone a long time, Rachel, but you're safe now. We've got you." Her eyes filled with tears as the weight of reality began to sink in. 10 years. 10 years stolen from her life, spent in darkness just beneath the feet of her children and neighbors. Upstairs, David Miller's composure cracked. When officers informed him of the discovery, he lashed out in a rage. "You don't understand. She was going to leave me. She was going to destroy our family. I did what I had to do." He was tackled to the ground, handcuffed, and read his rights. As he was led past stunned neighbors, he shouted incoherently about betrayal, loyalty, and how Rachel belonged to him. The very man who had stood before TV cameras pleading for help a decade earlier was now unmasked as the monster who had orchestrated the entire nightmare. As paramedics lifted Rachel onto a stretcher, neighbors gathered outside in disbelief. Some wept openly. Others stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. Mrs. Pratt, the neighbor who had once sworn she heard a woman's cries, clutched her chest. "I knew it," she whispered. "All those nights. I knew it." Rachel was rushed to the hospital where doctors confirmed she was severely malnourished, suffering from anemia, dehydration, and long-term vitamin deficiencies. Yet despite it all, she had survived. In interviews over the following weeks, Rachel recounted pieces of her captivity. She explained how that night in 2008, after their argument, David had tricked her into going downstairs, claiming the furnace was making strange noises. When she stepped into the basement, he locked the door behind her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. He fed her just enough to keep her alive, forbade her from making noise, and threatened to hurt the children if she tried to escape. The letters that had arrived at Anna's house, David had forced Rachel to write them under supervision, dictating every word. He mailed them himself, making sure they contained nothing traceable. The tapping Emily remembered hearing as a child, Rachel's desperate attempts to communicate, hoping her children might realize she was still there. And the boarded-up windows? Not for insulation, but to muffle any chance of her cries for help reaching the outside world. It was a decade-long horror, unfolding beneath the very noses of neighbors, teachers, and even investigators. The discovery of Rachel Miller in her own basement sent shockwaves far beyond Kalamazoo County. News outlets across the nation picked up the story, branding it the basement horror and the case of the missing wife found at home. It was the kind of revelation people couldn't look away from, a living nightmare that forced communities everywhere to question how such evil could hide in plain sight. In the hospital, Rachel's frail body was stabilized with IV fluids, vitamins, and careful nutrition. Doctors warned her recovery would be long and complicated, not only physically, but mentally. When Emily and Jacob finally saw her for the first time in 10 years, the reunion was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Emily, trembling, whispered, "Mom?" as though afraid it might be a dream. Rachel broke down, pulling her children into her arms despite her weakness. "You grew up without me," she sobbed, "but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped fighting to come back." Jacob, who had carried guilt for years over believing his mother had abandoned them, collapsed into tears. "I thought you left us, Mom. I thought you didn't want us anymore." Rachel held him tight. "No, sweetheart, I was always here, right here." For the Miller children, the truth was devastating, but also liberating. The shadow of doubt, that lingering fear their mother had walked away, was finally erased. Meanwhile, David faced a mountain of charges: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, multiple counts of abuse and endangerment. During his trial in early 2019, the prosecution painted a picture of obsession and control. They revealed that David's motive was rooted in fear of abandonment. Rachel had confided to friends about divorce, and rather than lose her, David chose to imprison her. Witnesses testified about David's erratic behavior over the years: his overprotectiveness, his secrecy, his hostility when anyone asked about the basement. Neighbors described the strange noises, the boarded windows, and the way he isolated his children from the community. The most damning testimony came from Rachel herself. Weak but determined, she took the stand and told her story. Her voice quivered, but her words cut through the courtroom with devastating clarity. "He told me if I screamed, if I tried to get out, he would hurt the kids. I believed him. Every day I lived in fear, not just for myself, but for them." She described how he monitored her, how he controlled when she ate, when she slept, even when she could use the bathroom, how he made her write those staged letters, how he stripped away her sense of time until the years blurred together into a never-ending nightmare. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as she spoke. Even hardened officers admitted later that her testimony was one of the most haunting they had ever heard. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. David Miller was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling his actions a grotesque betrayal of human decency and the sacred trust of family. When the sentence was read, David erupted. He shouted at Rachel, calling her a liar, screaming that she owed him loyalty. Bailiffs restrained him as the courtroom erupted in disbelief and anger. Rachel, clutching her children's hands, didn't flinch. For the first time in 10 years, she felt free. In the weeks following the trial, detectives revealed chilling details about the basement room. The chains in the wall bore marks of years of wear. Rachel had etched small tally marks on the concrete, attempting to count the days. Old food cans and bottles confirmed she had survived on meager rations, sometimes going days with only water. And in one haunting discovery, detectives found a worn-out family photograph taped to the wall. Rachel had kept it as her only reminder of the life she was missing. Experts called her survival extraordinary. Psychologists described it as a case of coercive captivity, where fear, manipulation, and psychological control were as powerful as physical restraints. For the community, the case was a mix of horror and guilt. Neighbors replayed the past decade in their minds, wondering how they had missed the truth. Mrs. Pratt admitted she still woke up at night, haunted by the faint cries she once heard. Teachers grieved over Emily's drawings, realizing the child's desperate clues had been overlooked. But perhaps the heaviest burden fell on the police. Detective Henderson, long retired, attended the trial. She confessed to reporters afterward, "I always felt it was him. I just couldn't prove it. And for 10 years, she was suffering in that basement while we walked away. That will stay with me forever." In the months after the trial, Rachel began the slow process of rebuilding. Therapy became a lifeline as she worked through the trauma. She moved into a safe location with Emily and Jacob, determined to reclaim what little time she had left. In one interview, she said softly, "He wanted to erase me, but I'm still here. I survived him, and now I'm going to live." Her words became a beacon, not just for her family, but for countless survivors of domestic abuse and captivity who saw in her story a reflection of their own struggles. The case of Rachel Miller remains one of the most chilling examples of hidden captivity in modern American history. It exposed how evil can hide behind the facade of normalcy, how the quietest house on the street can conceal the darkest of secrets. And it serves as a reminder, sometimes the most terrifying prisons aren't hidden in remote locations or abandoned warehouses. They're right beneath our feet, in the places we think we know best. If you found this story as haunting as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives for more true crime cases where the truth is stranger and far darker than fiction. Because behind every closed door, behind every missing person flyer, there may be a story waiting to be uncovered.